Sunil Paul is the CEO of Spring Free EV, a trailblazing company focused on accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles through innovative fintech solutions. With over 20 years in the tech and clean energy sectors, Sunil is celebrated as a visionary in sustainable transportation and green technologies. He's been featured in numerous articles on the future of mobility, green tech, and the gig economy in renowned publications like the New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg, and Wired. His expertise has been sought after at premier events such as TechCrunch Disrupt, the MIT Energy Conference, Green Biz Forum, and more. Before his leadership at Spring Free EV, Sunil was the co-founder and CEO of Sidecar, a pioneering ride-sharing platform that revolutionized urban transportation. Under his guidance, Sidecar was heralded for its innovative approach and its early emphasis on sustainability. The platform's groundbreaking strategy set benchmarks for the ride-sharing industry. You've had an incredible journey and has spanned various tech ventures, marking you a key influencer since the inception of the internet era. He holds a degree in electrical engineering from Vanderbilt University. Thank you for sticking with me here. It's a long journey, and I can't wait to get to know more of it. So thank you for being here with us.
Sure, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk to you.
All right, so let's start this off with, for those who've never heard of Spring Free EV, who are its customers? What problem are you helping them solve?
Yeah, our customers, and part of the reason why you don't hear as much about it is this is a B2B company, at least for now. And the focus really is, how do we make electric vehicles more affordable and grid friendly with just software? Not having to change new battery chemistries or some major change to the hardware. And the way we do this is really through fintech, by leaning into some of the advantages of electric vehicles, things that are unique to electric vehicles that gas and diesel really can't do. So one is that even though there's a premium for electric, as long as you're using the vehicle, it actually costs less over its lifetime because of lower fuel and lower maintenance costs. The second is that there's a tremendous amount of government support for electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure, and that's also unique. And the third is that because it interacts with the grid, with the utility, if that's done in a smart way, you can actually get paid for those services to the grid and generate revenue there. So our kind of realization is that if we can capture those economic advantages, use the common technology that's possible across all the electric vehicles, because they're all connected cars, unlike gas and diesel, then we can make electric vehicles more affordable, take all those economic advantages, kind of group them together and bring down that upfront cost, and make the electric vehicle more grid friendly, so that not only can you deploy more electric vehicles, but all that battery power can be used as a resource to get the grid to be even cleaner than it is today. So that's the big ambition for this company, is that we can have climate level impact by dramatically accelerating electric vehicle adoption in ways that simply would not be possible if we don't do this. So yeah, that's what we're up to.
I know this has been building a more sustainable planet, in essence, right? A cleaner, environmental friendly world is something that has been with you for some time. And so with Spring Free, you founded the Spring Free in 2021, so a couple of years ago.
That's correct. Yeah.
When it comes to validating a business problem, how do you go, or how are you doing it for your first customers at Spring Free? Because for founders, especially when they just get started, right, they have that thesis, they have that idea of what the problem is. How do you go about validating that?
It's a great question. I think it's one of the most important lessons and observations that entrepreneurs have to learn. It's the natural tendency to not want to get your idea out in front of customers. It's not good enough. We all
Not
wanted
ready.
ace, right? Like everybody wants an A, and we're all trained by educational institutions to get it perfect. You can't do that in entrepreneurship. You have to be willing to put forward the version that is terrible, and it's terrible, but it cuts to whatever the core value proposition is. It cuts to whatever the main point or main pain point of your customer. So in the case of Spring Free EV, our hypothesis was that the upfront cost of electric vehicles was a major pain point. So we took our early version of basically a lease product, a specialty lease product, and put it in front of small fleet managers, people who had anywhere from 5 to a couple of hundred vehicles. Often they didn't have any electric vehicles, and could we get real orders, like people paying us or willing to pay for that particular value proposition? And what we basically found is that everybody wanted to do it, whether or not they were good candidates for it for their own financial health, or whether or not they actually ended up transacting with us is a different question. But
Mm-hmm.
But it was clear. I mean, the demand signal was very, very strong.
When you say almost all of them, here's I just want to add an additional question to this, which is, when do you know that you actually do have something? That's a hard one, and I've seen
so hard to figure out.
And I've
so
seen
hard.
founders. I've noticed founders that have had a successful product in the past have a much better sense of when it's the right sign and when it's not the right sign, because they've seen it. Yeah. They've seen something that said, well, when we did this, this was the response to it, and I'm not getting that similar response. But how do you know here that? Did you have a similar reaction to that, or what was enough?
Here's my general rule of thumb, is that I'd rather have a small percentage of potential customers absolutely want the product yesterday, than have everybody say, yeah, that's nice, we can get to that eventually. Like, that's interesting. You don't want interesting. You want, oh my God, I need this. I need it now. I need it yesterday. Because if you can't get that, especially as a startup, like, look, the stuff's just not going to work as well as you think it is in the early years. And so you need customers that are willing to put up with that. My favorite story around that is my second company, Brightmail. It's the first anti-spam email security company. And so we didn't have any comparables to go and talk. We just knew that spam was becoming a problem for large email systems like ISPs, not really for others. So the question was, okay, is this a big enough problem that they're willing to pay some real money for, 6 figures at least? And so I actually had a first version of the product that involved client software, and I took it out to a number of ISPs. And the general response was, yeah, that's interesting. We don't really love adding client software. And so I assembled the team, the very, very small little contractor team I had. And I was like, okay, this idea's not going to work. We're going to kill it. And because I keep hearing they don't want to do anything on the client side, and I don't see how we can make this work on the server side. And then I went up to the whiteboard and I'm like, well, how would it work on the server side? And sketch it out. And that ended up being the basis of Brightmail. Um, and then I took that same idea back. And by the way, all the people that were working on it were all client-side developers. So, I kind of had to go back to the drawing board, literally, in terms of team as well. And then I took it back to all those same customers, potential customers, and said, okay, here's this new idea. It would only be server side. Here's how it would work. Like, if I built this, like, would you buy into it? And every one of them was like, yes, we don't know what to do. Most of them were failing miserably at controlling spam. So the best example of this is that, okay, so now we've raised a bunch of money. I forget how much we raised, $4 or $5 million, which is a lot back then to raise.
Yeah.
This is 1990 something. And we had the first version of our product. We're shipping it out to these big ISPs like Earthlink and Verizon and some others. And we get the reports back on how effective it is. And it's terrible. It's only catching 50% of the spam.
Oh,
50%.
50%. I mean, that's better than nothing.
Well, that's exactly what the customer said. They're like, yeah, we expect it to be better, but to be honest, our own systems are only catching like 20 or 30%. So it's better than we had. So no, don't take it back.
That's when it's a really big problem where even incrementally improving it just a little is more than enough for the customer.
Right. Now they expected it to be better than that, and it did. I mean, Brightmail is still a product out there under Symantec, and by the time we sold it, it was, I don't know, 99. It was very, very high percentage catching spam. But like that, 50%, like a product that only works half the time.
Half the time.
Terrible. That's terrible. So,
but you didn't lose customers.
We didn't lose those customers. No, they once we got it fully done, they paid us 6 figures a year to implement that system.
How?
So
yeah. No, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to say for Spring Free EV, it also matters that, and for Brightmail, like in my view, it's okay to start with a small segment that really, really cares about the product. So, Brightmail was only the large ISPs. Corporations weren't yet having a problem with spam. At Spring Free EV, we started with small, medium-sized fleet managers, and even within that world, we started with just those that rent out cars to others. Now, only recently are we starting to get regular corporates like, I don't know, electronics repair shops and people who are moving their equipment around for setting up events and just all kinds of, because it turns out 2/3 of the fleet vehicles in the United States are owned by or operated by these small, medium-sized fleets, not by Hertz and Enterprise and Ryder and everyone else, which is kind of where everybody's mind goes. So, So anyway, like having a small segment that really, really cares is way more valuable in the beginning than like, mediocre interest across lots and lots of people.
When you reached out to those small fleet owners, was the pricing model the same as it is now? Let's say when it's evolved. How do you, because pricing is so crucial and it's so important, but many founders, including myself, right? Every time you're trying to figure it out, what makes most sense. How did you figure out what made sense for them?
Well, the initial version that we put out was frankly very different than what we did today. And because we're balancing it with the other side of the market, in other words, a source of capital, that was a non-starter. So that was like, okay, if you've got another set of constituencies, another set of customers, which in our case we do, we have capital as one of our customers. It has to work for both sides. So that's one way that your pricing's off. The other really important bit of insight was provided by one of the co-founders who he was basically a retired venture capitalist. He's been through lots and lots of companies.
Yep.
And we were thinking about pricing. His basic advice was higher than you think is appropriate, because like everybody loves a cheap price. So you don't really know if you're getting product market fit if your price is really low. Whereas if your price is a little bit high and people are still loving what you're doing, then okay, you've got something, because no one is going to complain when you lower your price. But you might lose significant numbers of customers if you raise your prices later. So that, I think, is an important principle now that I carry with me.
I love that.
Marty is the one who put that in our heads.
Have you ever,
honestly, whenever we think about things now, we always take the attitude of,
just
especially with a new thing, like whatever we think the high end is, let's see if that'll work first. And that doesn't work, fine. Maybe it is a pricing question. We need to bring it down. And, obviously we need to make money on it. But yeah, try to start high, because also things are not going to work exactly according to plan. So if you price it down to like a really, really thin margin and something goes wrong or your expectations aren't met,
you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, you're done.
Yep.
Whereas things do, like, hooray, things do go according to plan. Again, no one will complain that you lowered your price.
So you mentioned Brightmail, and that was from 98 to 2004. It was acquired by Symantec for 370 million, whatever it was that was mentioned during that time. When did you know it was time to sell? Because we have founders that are growing and can be growing their companies fairly fast, and that's when they want to keep doubling down. But when do you for you personally, when did you realize this is the moment for us?
Well, so we had filed an S1. We were ready to go public. We had a profitable company. This was 2004, after the dot-com crash.
Yeah, you made it through the crash. Yeah, that's incredible.
And had built a profitable company, which you kind of needed at that point, right? Like during 99, 2000, you could take companies public for way more, not making any money and no hopes of ever being profitable. And that was nuts. But the pendulum kind of swang significantly the other direction, and you kind of needed to show profitability and that you're, so it wasn't at it. Anyway, my point is that what we ended up getting an offer from Symantec. Symantec was already an investor, so they already had insight. They were already on board. When you file an S1, all your information's out there. It's been vetted. It's if you're going to sell the company, it's actually a pretty good time, because otherwise you're going to take a bunch of dilution. So I would say there's one of the best times to sell is when you have a natural built-in alternative. So a natural built-in alternative is you're about to raise a bunch of money, you're about to go public, you've got an existing offer from somebody else. What is a terrible time to sell is when you have no offers and your back's up against the wall and you're running out of money. Did that at Sidecar. And, happy to report we found a buyer. And exited to General Motors, but that is not the situation you want. You want a situation, because competition for the deal is the big driver for getting a good outcome. And competition can be, well, we're going to go public, and the public's going to buy our shares, or we've got the significant investor lined up, and they're going to put in another round of capital. It both creates a competition, and for the insiders, you're looking at trading it off against taking that dilution of whatever that round of financing is.
You provide a perfect transition talking about Sidecar, and I want to continue it. So just to give some background, you've had the idea for ride sharing as far back as 97. I read your blog. I read all of it. Awesome storytelling about your journey and, waiting for your wife to pick you up and trying to figure out how come, like, you can't just ask a stranger to, take you to your destination. And in essence, that's when you were thinking about ride sharing. So way back, and you also pushed your ideas came into fruition with a bill that was passed in California that allowed a car owner to make occasional income off their car without threatening their personal insurance, which was a massive barrier that removed and I laid the foundation for a ton of ride-sharing companies as the ones that everyone knows now, Uber and Lyft. So you've been in that space for some time, and you've done some incredible work towards it. You mentioned that Sidecar, you had to sell it, right? That you got to that phase where you wanted to sell it. What were the steps, even those a lesson of not, this isn't something you don't do when you want to sell, where things are not working out and there's a need and a necessity for you to find a buyer. But for those that are in that situation, what are things that you believe maybe you would go back and give yourself advice on, or some pitfalls?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so in the case of someone else, I'm trying to remember who, provided some great advice at the beginning of that process. We were thinking about engaging an investment banker to help us with the process, but basically found that at the price point that we were looking for, the minimum fee that an investment banker was typically looking for was about $1 million. So that would have been a significant portion of the total amount. And that's kind of a minimum. And then otherwise they wanted, a percentage of the total amount. And, you really, you kind of want the best advisors in that capacity you can possibly get. And when you're doing a smaller size transaction, you typically don't get the best, most connected people.
Right.
Just because those people tend to get attracted to the bigger deals. So, so the advice was simply, got to run an investment banking kind of process. And now, luckily, certainly I'd been through a number of different kinds of transactions. Very importantly, one of my board members, Robert Goldberg, had been through many kinds of fundraising and sale transactions. So the two of us really kind of teamed up to go tackle this. And it's a bit of a numbers game. So, you ultimately want 2 term sheets at least, so that you've got some competition for the deal. Well, how are you gonna get 2 term sheets? Well, that means you probably need about 5 times that many to be in a serious mode of thinking about it, in a deep diligence mode. In order to get 5 in a deep diligence mode, you're probably going to need about 25 that are seriously considering it, and have taken, say, a first or second meeting. And then in order to get to those first or second meetings, you probably need 50 to 100 that you reach out to.
Right.
Like, like when someone explained the math to me, I'm like, whoa, that means, we got to reach out to anybody and everybody who might be a candidate. So then we went through and just brainstormed every single possible company that might be a candidate. We ranked them then on 3 criteria. Are they acquisitive? Do they have a history of making acquisitions? Do they have the wherewithal to make an acquisition? Do they have enough market or whatever? And can we get a hold of them? Like, do we have some way that we think we can get a hold of them? And basically, anybody who was 2 out of those 3 criteria, we reached out to, and that, I think, more or less was 50 or 60 candidates. And the math more or less did work that way. I mean, we in the end had 2 term sheets, and one of them was terrible. It was basically,
but it was something.
yeah. I mean, the other one was basically an acqui-hire for nothing. That was the alternative deal that we could have done. So, but at least we could credibly say we have an alternative. It's like possibly the worst alternative you can think of, but better than shutting down everything. So
that's such a wonderful, in hindsight, right? Because I'm sure when you're going through it, it is horrific. And you say, I'll never do this again. But the sheer fact that that is an experience now that is under your belt, that you say, you know what, like, you can do this, right? You can share the golden nuggets with others, and hopefully they can learn from this and try not to find themselves in those situations. And this is the reality. I mean, with Sidecar, you started off, and for me personally, it's the failures that, as long as you really learn what went wrong and what could have been better, that's the golden nuggets. Those are the golden nuggets, right? That's what gives you experience and allows you to make better decisions as you continue growing personally and professionally. But with Sidecar, with Sidecar, 2011, you started it. Any other lessons learned? I know that there's a ton behind testing this theory, because now Uber, Lyft, sure, like, of course that works, right? Like, of course. But back in the day, is like, who the hell would get in a stranger's car, and why would you do that? And who, like, it just.
By the way, this is a great example of don't listen to your friends. Your friends are either, like, first of all, they tend to want to say, oh yeah, that's a smart idea, you're so smart. And that's great. Like, you want friends to be supportive of what you're doing. Now, funny enough, in this particular circumstance, pretty much all my friends are like, there's no way I'd do that. Get into a stranger's car? No way. I don't care.
Couldn't even get the helpful, I'll say something nice. No way.
I can't think of maybe 1 or 2 people, but by far and away, the answer was no, I'm not doing that. But, I had 20 something co-founders who, when we talked to their friends, they're like, yeah, I'd do that. Especially if I save $10.
I love that. How was it?
Small population that really cared versus, satisfying everybody.
Is that literally for Sidecar? Is that how the market was tested? You went to a bunch of friends or people within your group and said, like, hey, if it costs you this much and you could go from point A to point B, would you do it?
So I've been a believer ever since the very first company to get a really basic. This is kind of startup 101 now, but even the very first company was like, get a really low fidelity version of what it is that you think you're going to build, and get it in front of people, potential customers, get their feedback. And some of this training was out of AOL, where at AOL we put pretty polished things in front of people. But over the years, I just learned, like, you just need to have a conversation with people about the thing, and they can't be your friends, because sometimes your friends just want to say you're so smart, and sometimes your friends are the wrong demographic.
Right.
So, like, you want to get it in front of people at some kind of resolution. So, even if it's a very kind of grainy version of what you think the ultimate value is. So, I mean, in the case of Brightman, that was just a conversation with people that were smart enough to, like, I think had enough credibility to say, you know, I can go
Right.
build this complicated server thing. And my co-founder had built like big complicated email server stuff at AOL and elsewhere. Um, so that was all good. But in the case of Sidecar, like we just hired drivers, and in some cases we did it with our
You
own
drove,
cars.
right?
Yeah,
Didn't
I
you?
drove. In fact, the car, real clunker now, um, was the car that I drove around. Um, and by the way, it's also the car that I put into one of the first peer-to-peer car sharing setups. Um,
I love that.
anyway, the yeah, we were like testing, like, what's it really like?
Yep.
Have a car pick you up that's not a taxi, that's not a limo. Now, in many cases, it was people we knew, so we were testing like the rudimentary software of it. But in other cases, we're like literally like, okay, we're going to hire some drivers, and we're going to let people order, um, and
And
like
see
let's
where
just
that
get their
takes us.
reactions. And the reaction was, yeah, I was a little nervous once I got in, and I was fine. And it helped that you did background checks and all this stuff that you could do now that you couldn't do 10 years before that.
What? So you were getting traction, then Lyft, Uber, all
Yeah,
these guys were
yeah,
coming in. What do you, in hindsight, what do you look back and say, um, the game, we were playing this game, or I was placing a ton of my energy here, and maybe I could have been placing it here. Anything that comes back from
yeah. There
that
are lots
time?
of things there are many things. I
I
think
mean, in
there's kind of
hindsight,
like,
everything is, oh,
oh,
it's so it's
yeah,
so simple.
everything's
It's
clear in
not.
hindsight.
Yeah.
I think there were several macro things that were going on. One is, uh, I think I and the rest of the team, including the board, everybody, we were a little slow to realize the strategic weapon of raising a lot of money in
Mm,
order to get to very large scale. We knew that it was a scale game. We knew there were network effects, all that stuff.
right.
We were on that from the very beginning. That was not something we missed. But Uber in particular was able to do this to great effect of just raise huge amounts of money. And it was an era where close to zero interest rates, the
Mm.
willingness of investors to wait a long time before you show profitability, and to simply invest in growth. We're
Grab
no
as much
longer
as
in
the
that
market
era.
as quickly as possible with as much money as you can raise, having pricing that doesn't, I'm sure that doesn't make any sense. That costs very little for consumers, I'm sure, and that might have not been giving the margins that they're thinking of, but it's all about that race of how quickly you can grow that
Yeah.
network.
I think that was one. I think another big one, of course, that world has changed. Interest rates really do make a difference in overall dynamics of a
Mhm.
market, and they're the foundation on which everything is built. Um, I think another one was simply not I, Lyft and its goofy pink mustache was super effective, and
Mm.
we were ahead of them um, before they launched, and we're still ahead of them even after they launched. But the awareness built by the pink mustache really was super effective. And it didn't matter that it had nothing to do with a ride. It didn't matter that
Right.
it just generated awareness.
It's stuck in people's mind.
Yeah,
What that thing with a mustache? Why not? Uh,
right.
yeah, yeah. I love talking about. I want to jump into a little into the talent And, because yes, you have a product and all that, but at the end of the day, it's the individuals that are around you and what you're able to get done. What do you believe the role of a CEO or founder should be? Does that role change as the team grows? Because I know that it does, but I'm curious in what ways do you see it?
In the beginning, every company that I've started or been involved in, like in the beginning, you are doing everything and being willing to do, it kind of depends on the makeup of the founding team. So you're not necessarily doing everything. I mean, I haven't coded anything real since college, so I'm not a coder, but you're basically playing, you're filling in the gaps for all the other talents around the table. And, your kind of number one job is make sure there's adequate resources in to continue to execute, and to make sure that there's kind of like, it's ultimately about execution. And so you have adequate resources, you have clarity of vision and clarity of plan for what it is you're trying to go do. And then you got to have adequate, the right mix of people and talents to go make it happen. And any one of those three being off, and
it throws off
any
the
one of
whole.
those three being off, and it's not going to work. Right?
When,
like you got to get all three working.
When is it that, and this could be with Brightmail or Sidecar or any of those journeys that you've had, when does it, or did it make sense for you to make your first hires? Because that's also something that we see a lot with founders, where when do I make that first hire, and who should that first hire be? And I'm sure there's questions that you ask yourself, but what would those questions be? And when you remember doing that for any of those companies?
Yeah, that's I don't have a really clear rules of thumb for that, because when I think about these different companies I've been involved with, sometimes the first hire is simply a co-founder that that you've kind of begun the journey with, and it makes sense to continue. I've definitely had many difficult co-founder conversations where it's time for them to go. But so it's not like permanent employment or anything. But
for instance, for like Sidecar, were the first hire developer? Was it in the marketing side? Was it like who, from what you remember?
Well, Sidecar was a bit of a unique situation because I'd already been working on Variations, and I actually found this little company in Michigan that was they were building software for Android and for bus routing. I think that's what it was doing. Anyway, back when that was not a common type of software, this company was doing something pretty interesting. So I think I called him up. I don't even remember how I found out about him. But I just called him up and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this category." I flew up there, pitched him on the sort of vision of where we're headed with what I want to do, and basically is like, "Come do it with me. Like, let's go create a company." So we actually took that original company, the LLC,
and that's how
and
it
morphed
evolved.
it into Sidecar. So
Or
So
what
I'd say
about
that's a bit of
for
an unusual journey for
what
most
about
starting.
for Spring Free? You
Yeah,
raised, and then who were the first who were the first employees and that you recruited, and was there a reason for bringing in them those particular responsibilities?
yeah. Well, with Spring Free EV, also had a maybe everything's unusual. I don't know. I could give you a more typical example of Freeloader and Brightmail. Those are maybe more typical. But with Spring Free EV, I was literally just trying to sort out some ideas.
Uh-huh.
I was not clear about this is going to be a company. In fact, the original idea was that it would be a fund that would fund other companies to go
In this space.
pursue mobility, electric vehicle
Got it.
oriented things. And um, and so, part of the reason why I reached out to one of the co-founders, Marty, um, was because retired venture capitalist, he'd done a bunch of fund stuff. Also, already a friend of mine, and so that always makes it easier.
Right.
And along the journey of figuring out what makes sense to actually take advantage of this opportunity and turn it into some, world impact level company, um, we realized actually a fund doesn't make any sense. An actual company makes sense. And, that was the beginning of building it out, bringing in co-founders at that point. Now, funny enough, we had already raised money for something that was more similar to a fund idea,
Mm.
and we kind of morphed it into the company idea. So again, that's kind of a weird, unusual circumstance.
A
A
weird
much more
angle
typical
for the.
scenario was the first two companies where there's early idea formation. In the first one, you know, um, I met Mark Pincus, who most well known for starting Zynga, but he's also done a bunch of other things on his own. After Freeloader, um, I met him in a pizzeria, introduced by mutual friends, and um, we decided to go work on this set of ideas together. Hadn't yet decided to start a company. Once we validated, oh, this is a real, genuine idea,
Right.
then we decided to start a company. In the case of Brightmail, I had already done a lot of the validation, already knew that I wanted to start a company, and then brought in co-founders.
And
So
but
it kind of
and
varies depending on the situation.
got it. So you talked you mentioned a bit on, and this will we're getting close to the end here. I want to be respectful of your time, but you talked about funding. You've been a founder that has raised, and then you've also are a founding partner of Spring Ventures, and you've an angel investor. So you've experienced funding from both sides.
Yes.
What advice can you offer founders when it comes to fundraising their first round? What should they prioritize? Are there certain pitfalls that you say, just make sure to avoid certain things, or keep an eye out for this and this? Anything that comes to mind?
I mean, there's so much advice out there on how to do this. I would actually say that same lesson about the sale of Sidecar also applies to fundraising. In other words, there's an interesting dynamic at work. It's not just in fundraising and selling companies, college applications and job applications. The transaction cost of both sides has gotten lower. In other words, if you're trying to raise money, it's much easier to reach out to a lot of different investors than it used to be and track them and track the doc send and keep them in a CRM and blah, blah, blah. I could never keep all that stuff straight in my head back with the first two companies. No way.
Right.
Like this crazy number of prospects. At the same time, the receivers of those, like the deal flow that I get, relatively small investor, is pretty sizable. And then I can go on to Angel List and get even a crazy more volume.
Right.
Both sides are just seeing a much greater volume. So as a founder, you have to kind of be prepared to talk to lots of investors. Don't expect, like, back in the day, the advice to me was, well, you want to like go talk to 3 or 4, tell each one of them that they're super special. And, if you can't close one of them, then move on to another 3 or 4, and then move on to another 3 or 4. And if that doesn't work, then recalibrate. But in today's world, like, you can reach out to 30 just as well as you can reach out to 3.
Yeah.
So it's and the other side is looking at not just, oh, we got 2 deals we want to look at today. They're looking at 20 deals, and like,
Yeah.
so it's a little bit more like, when you're buying a house, a real estate agent will also always tell you, well, you just need one house.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter how many you look at. You can look at a lot, but you only need one. Same thing as the buyer. Well, you need more than one investor, but you don't need 500 investors. You just need, a handful.
Yeah. A couple.
But you kind of need to be prepared to go out and talk to a lot, and have a CRM and keep track and monitor, have a whole DocSend or whatever other document management system, because otherwise you just won't be playing the volume that you kind of need to. At the same time, you can't just spray and pray with a ton of emails and
Yes.
expect that, oh, if I send out 500 emails, I'll
Then it's gonna work
surely at
out.
least somebody will respond. It doesn't quite work that way. You still have to pay. You still got to love each one
All right.
as if they're special.
Right now with Spring Free, is there anything? So from our community, again, I wanna thank you very much for the time and for sharing your journey with us. Anything you want to share about Spring Free that we didn't get to cover that's important for us to know about where you are, what you're doing, anything that you like to
Well, thanks
share?
for that. Look, we're out to have climate level impact, and I I believe that this company can do it. So um, we're always looking for great talent.
Mm.
That's always something I'm on the lookout for. May or may not be a position right away, but um, like, when we find people that are especially great fits, there are many people that I kind of keep in our orbit, because as we grow, we're going to want to be able to pull more and more people in. When you're in hyper growth, talent is often the constraining factor. Um,
Mm.
we're not yet in that like crazy growth phase that I've experienced with many other companies, um, but we're preparing ourselves to be in that crazy growth phase. So yeah, and like, we're a very entrepreneurial company, so building the experience of what it's like to grow rapidly, and also I feel like I've dramatically improved um, our own techniques for innovation and iteration inside this company. Um,
And
that's a whole other podcast on its own. But yeah, I
when
think
it
there's a
comes
lot
to
to be learned.
partnerships or like channel marketing, distribution, are there any particular entities out there that you're at the moment looking to connect with, anything like that? Because that might
Yeah,
be,
I mean,
we have plenty of people in so many different industries that I have no doubt there could be introductions or things like that.
anybody who touches the activity of fleet management in one way or another, through financing, through technology, through supplier, directly managing fleets. All those people are ones that are potentially helpful to us. We have, in addition to this kind of lease product that I've already described, we just introduced a new product, which is a bit esoteric. But if you know anything about renewable energy finance, which many of us on the team, the founding team do, it's something called tax equity. And tax equity is about a $20 billion segment out of renewables. We're the first to have introduced it as an electric vehicle tax equity product. And in simple terms, what it provides is a way to, it fits into the financing structure of someone who's financing a bunch of electric vehicles and provides them capital that otherwise is very expensive and helps protect them against the fall in the value of the vehicle over the term of whatever the lease or whatever it is. These are major pain points in the industry right now, is how do you manage the EV tax credits? And I would say almost everyone is scared of what's going to be the value of these vehicles 3, 5, 8 years from now. So it's a new product that's designed for very large applications, large fleets, larger financings, and we're getting a lot of interest in it. We just announced it 2 weeks ago, so it's
very cool.
It's hot off the press.
You heard it here. Sunil, thank you so much.
All right, have a good rest of the day. Bye bye.